It started as an ordinary evening in London, a city that never sleeps. Yet sometimes, even the most ordinary nights can turn into unimaginable tragedy. Imagine the skyline at twilight, the Thames glinting under the last rays of the sun, rooftops buzzing with laughter and music, cocktails sparkling in the hands of those enjoying the city's glittering nightlife. In the midst of it all, at a popular rooftop bar, a life that once seemed secure and bright came crashing down, quite literally, in a way that no one could have foreseen. One moment, there was laughter, chatter, and the rhythmic pulse of music blending into the soft hum of the city. The next moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that presses in on your chest, a void so vast it drowns out everything else. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. How does something like this happen? How does a single misstep, a single second, erase a life? And why does this matter to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge? Because the person who fell was not just anyone. They were someone from Kate and William's past, someone they had laughed with in lecture halls, debated with over late-night coffees, shared secrets within the quiet corners of college libraries. And now, that past collided violently with the present, leaving shock, grief, and questions that will not leave the halls of the palace anytime soon. The news broke just a minute ago, and already the world is trying to make sense of it. Social media feeds are alight with speculation, cameras hover over the bar like vultures, and yet, even as the public watches, there is an intimacy here, a grief that feels impossibly private. How do you process a death that hits so close to the people you care about, a death that whispers uncomfortable truths about time, friendship, and inevitability? Kate Middleton and Prince William were notified almost immediately. Imagine receiving a message like that in the middle of your day, while attending to the endless duties of royalty. A single notification, a single call, and your world tilts on its axis. There is the weight of history. These were not mere acquaintances. They were classmates, companions in youthful ambition, witnesses to the formation of values, and, in many ways, the architects of memories that shaped who the royals became as young adults. The layers of grief are complex. Public mourning and private sorrow exist side by side, creating a tension that is almost unbearable. The rooftop bar, situated on one of London's trendiest streets, is the kind of place where the city's elite blend with the vibrant energy of the metropolis. Lights reflect off the glass panels, cocktails catch the orange hue of the sunset, and music pulses like a heartbeat. It was supposed to be a celebration, a reunion perhaps, or just a night of laughter in the city they loved. But tragedy has a way of cutting through illusions of safety. One wrong step, one accidental slip, and suddenly, life becomes fragile in a way most people cannot comprehend until they are faced with it themselves. Witnesses describe the scene as chaotic, yet eerily surreal. Some say they heard a scream first, high-pitched, full of panic and disbelief. Others say it was the sudden thud, a sound so final it resonated in the hearts of everyone present. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the damage had already been done. The victim, a former classmate of the Cambridge couple, had fallen from an unimaginable height, a 100-foot plunge that no human body could endure without severe consequences. Those who were there have described the scene in whispers, their voices tinged with shock and fear. It is a scene that haunts them, a moment frozen in time, replaying in their minds even as they try to convince themselves it did not really happen. But why does this story matter so urgently? Why should anyone outside royal circles care? The answer is simple. This is not just about a tragic accident. It is about connections, history, and the way the past can resurface in ways we never anticipate. It is about the weight of choices made in youth, and how the bonds we form, or the rivalries we nurture, can reverberate decades later. It is about the fragility of life, the unpredictability of circumstance, and the shocking truth that even in a city as sophisticated as London, tragedy can strike at any moment. The victim's life was, in many ways, intertwined with the Cambridge legacy. Stories from their college days paint a picture of someone bright, ambitious, and fiercely intelligent, yet also complicated and perhaps misunderstood. Those who knew them speak of late-night study sessions, debates over politics, and plans for futures that suddenly never arrived. They describe someone who could make you laugh and challenge you intellectually in the same breath, someone whose presence commanded attention without ever demanding it. And now, those voices are gone. Those plans are unrealized. Those memories are frozen in time, leaving a void that cannot be filled. Kate and William, meanwhile, are grappling with layers of grief that the public can only partially understand. On one level, there is the personal loss, a friend, a peer, a link to the past. On another, there is the public dimension, the cameras, the scrutiny, the constant demand for composure. The royals are trained to remain poised, to speak carefully, to navigate crises with a measured calm. Yet grief does not wait for protocol. It crashes over you in waves, relentless and unpredictable, no matter how much training or experience you have. One can only imagine the weight on their shoulders as they try to process a death that is deeply personal while also facing a world that demands spectacle. The city itself seems to mourn in tandem. Streets are abuzz with speculation, bars and cafes become arenas for whispered theories, and social media explodes with instant reactions. Some posts are sympathetic, some are speculative, and some are downright cruel. In the digital age, news travels faster than comprehension, and the lines between fact, rumor, and conjecture blur. How do you sift through truth when the volume of voices is deafening? How do you honor someone's life amid a storm of narrative chaos? And yet, amidst the shock, there are tantalizing clues that something more might be at play. Authorities are investigating, witnesses are being interviewed, and bits of information trickle into the public eye. The victim's final moments are becoming a puzzle that must be pieced together. Each witness adds a new layer. Each detail adds tension. Questions emerge. Was it truly an accident? Could there have been external factors? Were there rivalries or conflicts that might have contributed? These questions hover like shadows, refusing to dissipate. As we dive into this story, one thing becomes painfully clear. This is not a simple tragedy. It is a web of emotion, history, and consequence. It is a moment where the past and present collide, where laughter from college halls meets the stark finality of loss. And it is a reminder of how thin the line between celebration and catastrophe can be. But perhaps the most pressing question of all remains. What really happened that night on the rooftop? Was it a tragic misstep, a lapse in judgment, or something far more sinister? What secrets linger beneath the surface of this city, this bar, this event that connected so many lives in one fleeting moment? 1 minute, life was normal. The next, it was gone. Kate and William are left holding pieces of a story they never expected to face again. A story that may reveal more about their past than they are prepared to confront. And as the investigation unfolds, one thing is certain: the shock has only just begun. It was the kind of night that London would usually remember for its glittering lights, the hum of conversation, and the clink of glasses raised in celebration. The rooftop bar was perched above one of the city's most iconic streets, a panoramic view stretching across the Thames and the historic skyline. From this vantage point, the city seemed almost serene, bathed in a golden glow as the sun finally surrendered to twilight. But serenity, as it often does, can be deceptive, because on this night, something extraordinary, unimaginable, and heartbreaking was about to unfold. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of expensive perfumes and cologne. Laughter bubbled up from the crowd, punctuated by the soft clatter of barware and the subtle thrum of music vibrating through the wooden floors. Among the revelers were friends reconnecting, couples celebrating small victories, and the occasional curious onlooker drawn by the buzz of the city. But in one corner of the rooftop, a gathering of young adults carried an energy that was distinctly different. There was a familiarity, an intimacy shaped by years of shared experience, late-night study sessions, and secrets told in hushed voices long before adulthood weighed them down. And yet, even in the midst of laughter, something felt slightly off. Perhaps it was the way one of the friends lingered near the edge of the balcony, glancing down at the streets below, or the fleeting look of unease in someone else's eyes as they joked too loudly, laughed too abruptly. No one could have predicted the series of events that would spiral out of control in mere seconds. It started almost imperceptibly. A stumble, a misstep, a laugh cut short, and then the world tilted. A scream shattered the rooftop's festive veneer. High-pitched, raw, full of panic. It sliced through the night air, stopping conversations midword and drawing every eye to the edge of the building. The thrum of music was suddenly drowned out by the sound of chaos. Drinks tipped over. Plates clattered. The air became heavy, saturated with disbelief. People froze, unsure of what they were witnessing. One moment, everything was normal. The next, it wasn't. The victim, a former classmate of Kate and William, had slipped. Or had they? In moments like these, clarity is elusive. Witnesses reported seeing them lose balance near the balcony. Some insist it was a simple misstep, a tragic accident. Others whisper of a push, of someone unseen, a shadow in the wrong place at the wrong time. But what is undeniable is the immediacy of the fall. 100 feet down to the hard stone below, the descent was merciless. In an instant, life that had seemed so secure and vibrant vanished. Emergency services arrived with alarming speed. Sirens wailed through the streets of London, their urgent cries echoing off the buildings, bouncing through alleyways, calling attention to a tragedy that was already unfolding in real time on social media. First responders navigated the chaos with practiced precision, but the scene was nothing short of harrowing. Friends of the victim were screaming, some collapsing in shock, others attempting to reach their fallen companion despite the impossibility. The bar staff, trained in handling emergencies but unprepared for something of this magnitude, moved frantically to secure the scene, guide witnesses, and preserve evidence. Imagine what it must have been like for Kate and William, informed almost immediately of the incident. The news reached them while they were attending to their royal duties, a reminder that life outside the palace walls can be brutal and sudden. One moment, you are managing engagements, public appearances, and responsibilities that feel endless. The next, you are confronted with the fragility of life, the stark reminder that no amount of preparation can shield you from tragedy. The shock, the disbelief, the visceral grief, it all hit simultaneously. And yet, they had to maintain composure in a world that watches, scrutinizes, and judges every expression, every gesture. Witnesses described a scene that seemed to belong to a nightmare. People clustered near the edge of the bar, some trying to make sense of what had happened, others paralyzed by fear. The victim's friends were hysterical, shouting for help, demanding answers. Drinks spilled, chairs toppled, and a sense of chaos hung heavy in the night air. The fall had occurred so suddenly, so violently, that no one had time to intervene. It was a moment that would be etched into memory, replayed over and over, haunting every witness in different ways. And yet, the tragedy was only beginning to unfold in terms of its reach. Within moments, social media had lit up with the first images, tweets, and videos. The world seemed to shrink, connecting London's rooftop bar to living rooms and mobile devices across the globe. The lines between public spectacle and private grief blurred instantly. Anonymous posts speculated wildly. Accident? One tweet asked. Or something more sinister? Asked another. A short video clip, shaky and grainy, circulated within minutes, showing only the aftermath, but enough to ignite curiosity, speculation, and shock. Meanwhile, the emergency responders worked with methodical efficiency. Paramedics rushed to the scene, their hands steady despite the chaos around them. Firefighters navigated tight balconies, scaffolding, and emergency exits. Police began cordoning off the area, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together the puzzle. Every detail mattered. Every statement would later be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially challenged in courts, media coverage, and, perhaps, in royal conversations far from the public eye. What makes this story even more compelling, even more gut-wrenching, is the identity of the person who fell. This was no random stranger, no anonymous bystander. This was someone who shared history with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They had walked the same hallways, debated in the same classrooms, laughed in the same dormitories. They were entwined in a past that Kate and William had often left behind, memories tucked into old photo albums and private anecdotes. And now, that past had returned violently, with a force that no one could have anticipated. The bar, a symbol of city sophistication and nightlife, became a site of grief, speculation, and investigation. Guests were interviewed, photos were taken, statements recorded. Every angle of the rooftop was scrutinized, Every camera in the vicinity was examined. Security footage, bar logs, and witness accounts would all play a role in what could become a sprawling inquiry. The investigation, though just beginning, promised to uncover details that might shock even those closest to the victim. As the night wore on, one could sense the tension in the air. The city continued to pulse with life, taxis honking, music spilling from other venues, lights glinting off the Thames. But atop that rooftop, the vibrancy had been replaced by silence, punctuated only by sirens, whispers, and the occasional sob. People struggled to reconcile the night's initial excitement with the stark, sudden tragedy. It was a collision of joy and horror, laughter and grief, celebration and loss. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, questions began to emerge. How did this happen? Was it truly an accident? Could someone have been involved? Were there warning signs that had been overlooked? What did this night reveal about the bonds formed decades ago between Kate, William, and their college peers? Each unanswered question added a layer of suspense, a web of intrigue that promised to unravel in ways no one could yet predict. As the news spread, Kate and William were left grappling with their emotions behind closed doors. They were accustomed to public scrutiny, to carefully controlled images and statements. But grief does not conform to protocol. It spills over, uncontained and raw, often in moments no one expects. And while the world watched for calm composure, their private reality was one of shock, pain, and disbelief. In those first few hours, even the most seasoned journalists and royal commentators could sense that this was more than a simple story. This was a moment where the past collided with the present in violent, tragic ways. It was a story that would ripple through social circles, media outlets, and the corridors of the palace. It was a story that demanded answers, and yet, the answers were far from clear. And as the night stretched on, one thing became increasingly apparent. The fall, the emergency response, the shock, none of it was the end. It was only the beginning. The victim's life, the shared history with Kate and William, the questions that had been simmering quietly beneath the surface, all of it was about to erupt into a saga that no one could have foreseen. Who exactly was the person whose life had ended so abruptly that night? To many, they were simply a former classmate of Kate Middleton and Prince William, a name that might not resonate beyond elite college circles. But for those who knew them, they were far more than a name. They were someone whose presence had once shaped the daily rhythm of campus life, a peer who left an indelible mark on friends, professors, and even the royals themselves. And as the tragedy unfolded, understanding who they were became essential to making sense of why the loss felt so shocking, so personal, and so haunting. From the outside, their life looked enviable. They had walked the same hallowed halls as the Cambridge couple, sharing in the unique pressures and privileges of attending one of the most prestigious universities in the United Kingdom. They were bright, ambitious, and socially adept, the kind of person who could navigate both academic challenges and the labyrinth of elite social circles with ease. They participated in debates that left professors impressed, volunteered in campus initiatives that revealed their generosity, and maintained a network of friends that spanned the globe. Yet, as anyone who has ever lived through their formative years knows, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the polished veneer of confidence and success lay the complexity of a person struggling to reconcile expectations, personal desires, and the inevitable pressures of proximity to royalty. Classmates recall that they were ambitious, sometimes fiercely competitive, yet deeply loyal to those they considered true friends. They had an uncanny ability to make anyone feel seen, whether in the crowded lecture halls or during intimate late-night conversations over coffee. What made them even more fascinating, and, in many ways, unforgettable, was their connection to Kate and William. While the royals were, of course, the public figures the world knows today, on campus they were just students like anyone else. And yet, history suggests that even then, there was an aura around them. A mix of charisma, intelligence, and quiet power that drew certain individuals closer while intimidating others. Our victim was one of those drawn in, someone who shared laughter, secrets, and the odd rebellious moment that only youth allows. They were there in the background of countless photographs, sitting across from William in study sessions, exchanging playful banter with Kate during group projects, perhaps even joking about futures that no one could predict. Friends described them as someone magnetic. You couldn't help but notice when they entered a room, not because of flamboyance or attention-seeking behavior, but because they carried a presence that was subtle yet undeniable. They were thoughtful, often analytical, always curious. Professors recalled their sharp intellect. Peers remembered the debates that went on long past lectures, the endless questions about literature, politics, and the world at large. They were a bridge between social groups, someone who could effortlessly connect with both the ambitious and the quiet, the leaders and the followers. But as brilliant as they were, their life was not without shadows. Those closest to them knew about struggles that were carefully hidden from the public eye. Pressure, mental exhaustion, the constant need to maintain appearances. These were realities they faced daily. And in those moments of vulnerability, they relied on their friends, the people who shared their formative experiences, for support and understanding. Kate and William were undoubtedly part of that circle, sharing moments of quiet reflection amidst the intensity of campus life. What is particularly haunting now, in the wake of their death, is the sense of untold stories. Diaries, letters, private conversations, pieces of a life that might never be fully understood. Some of these friends have spoken, cautiously, on condition of anonymity. They recount a person who was both fiercely independent and deeply empathetic, someone who could argue passionately about injustice, yet quietly help someone in need. They talk about ambitions cut short by circumstance, about plans that would never see fruition, and about a life extinguished before its potential could be fully realized. Their identity also adds layers of intrigue. Being a former classmate of the Cambridges is more than a mere footnote. It places them in proximity to a world of influence, expectation, and scrutiny that most people could scarcely imagine. In college, these relationships may have seemed casual, the friendships of youth, fleeting and mutable. But years later, when tragedy strikes, the gravity of these connections becomes impossible to ignore. How much did Kate and William know about their struggles? How often did they reflect on shared experiences that now seem charged with a sense of foreboding? And, perhaps most critically, how would the royal connection shape the investigation and public narrative of this death? Those questions are not idle speculation. In fact, the Cambridge couple's responses in the immediate aftermath suggest a depth of personal connection that goes beyond the public eye. Their grief was private, raw, and intensely human. They were not only mourning a life lost, but also confronting a past intertwined with their own, a past that might hold memories and secrets that had long been dormant. In one sense, the death was a shock to the present. In another, it was a resurrection of the past, a reminder of how intertwined lives can be and how events long forgotten can resurface in devastating ways. Some classmates have shared stories that reveal the complexity of the victim's character. They were competitive, yes, but never vindictive. They sought excellence, not out of arrogance, but from a deep-seated desire to leave a mark. Their humor was sharp, sometimes biting, but it was tempered by a generosity that made them beloved. They navigated college life with an intelligence that inspired admiration and sometimes envy. And now, with their sudden death, those qualities are being remembered, celebrated, and mourned in equal measure. Yet, there are contradictions in the narrative that have only heightened public fascination. Some describe the victim as carefree, living life without concern for danger. Others recount moments of careful planning, foresight, and caution. These dualities make it difficult to form a simple picture. Were they reckless on the night of the fall? Was it truly an accident? Or could there have been factors at play that few understand? Each account adds complexity, and each conflicting story fuels speculation, both in the media and among those who were closest to them. It is also worth noting the impact of social media and instant news dissemination. Within minutes of the incident, photos and videos began circulating online. Some were blurry, some inconclusive, yet all carried the weight of immediacy. Friends and classmates of the victim grappled with the exposure, the rapid judgment of strangers, and the intrusion into private grief. Meanwhile, the public was forming opinions based on fragments, conjecture, and often unreliable sources. The combination of royal connection and sudden death ensured that this story would not remain confined to whispers. It was becoming a national, even international, headline. Amid this chaos, the human story remains. The victim's family, still processing the enormity of their loss, describes someone whose ambitions were vast, whose heart was open, whose intellect challenged everyone around them. They recall laughter, late-night conversations, dreams, and plans. They remember a person who, in life, sought connection and understanding, and now, in death, leaves questions that may never be fully answered. Kate and William, meanwhile, are caught between worlds. They are public figures, accustomed to the scrutiny and expectation that comes with their roles. Yet, in moments like these, the world outside the palace feels both intrusive and irrelevant. Their grief is intensely private, layered with memories that belong to them alone. And yet, they must navigate the public dimension, issuing statements, attending memorials, and appearing composed even as their hearts are breaking. The victim's life, once full of promise and potential, ended in an instant. But understanding who they were, their passions, their struggles, their relationships, is key to understanding why this death has reverberated far beyond the rooftop bar where it occurred. Their story is a reminder that our lives are complex tapestries of connection, influence, and consequence. And it raises questions about how those we care about, even years later, can shape the present in ways we may never anticipate. But the more the story unfolds, the more unsettling details emerge. Rumors circulate of past tensions, rivalries, and secrets buried in college years. Could something from their shared past with Kate and William have played a role in the events leading to that night? Were their warnings ignored, signs missed, or pressures unseen that contributed to the tragedy? And as investigators and the royal family dig deeper, one fact becomes chillingly clear. There is more to this death than a simple fall. Connections, hidden motives, and perhaps even unresolved conflicts from a decade or more ago are beginning to surface. The past, it seems, never truly stays buried. One former friend whispered to reporters that the victim had confided in them about something dangerous in the weeks leading up to the accident. Another hinted at a rivalry that had escalated in private, though no one could confirm whether it played a role. Every new revelation adds tension. Every whisper fuels speculation, and every memory resurrects questions that had been carefully tucked away for years. And as the world waits for clarity, one question looms over everything. Who was this person really, beyond the public perception, beyond the news headlines, beyond the royal connection? Their identity, their life, and their untimely death are intertwined in ways that promise shocking revelations still to come. The truth, as it often does, is more complex, more human, and more unsettling than anyone imagined. And as investigators continue to untangle the events of that night, one thing becomes painfully clear: what we think we know is only the beginning. The layers of their life, their connection to Kate and William, and the circumstances surrounding their death are far from fully revealed. It was a moment that defied comprehension. 1 second, the rooftop bar was alive with chatter, laughter, and the hum of the city. The next, it became a scene of chaos and horror. The victim, a former classmate of Kate Middleton and Prince William, was no longer among the living. 100 feet of air, stone, and inevitability had intervened, leaving friends, witnesses, and the royals in a state of shock that words alone cannot capture. Imagine being there. Imagine the festive lights, the music pulsing faintly beneath the night sky, the smell of cocktails and smoke mingling in the air, and then, suddenly, a scream. A sound so raw, so urgent, that it cuts through everything else, demanding attention. People turn. They freeze. Some instinctively reach out, too late. Some stumble backward, trying to process what they are witnessing. The noise of the city, the hum of conversation, the music, all of it disappears in an instant. What remains is a silence so absolute it presses against your chest and refuses to let go. Witnesses later described the scene with words like horrifying, unreal, and like a nightmare. One friend said they saw the victim leaning near the balcony railing, laughing at something a companion had said, unaware of the sudden danger. Another claimed they were closer, but even in that moment, seconds seemed suspended, frozen in a cruel tableau of fate. There was no time to intervene, no chance to change the outcome. It happened too fast, too violently, and the reality of the fall was inescapable. Emergency services arrived almost immediately. Paramedics, police, and firefighters converged on the rooftop, navigating a complex and dangerous space to reach the injured. But the truth was brutal. The victim had fallen from a height that left little hope of survival. Their body was discovered in the alley below, lifeless and broken. The paramedics worked diligently, performing every possible procedure, but the outcome was tragically inevitable. The witnesses' accounts, while chaotic and sometimes contradictory, reveal the emotional intensity of the moment. Some claim to have seen the victim's eyes widen in shock, the split-second realization of the fall. Others describe a hand grasping for the railing, fingers flailing, a desperate attempt to hold on. And then, the inevitable, the drop, the impact, the silence afterward. It is a scene that no one present will ever forget, replayed in nightmares, whispered recountings, and news reports that attempt to capture its gravity. Social media amplified the horror within minutes. A blurry video circulated online, showing only the aftermath, but enough to ignite global attention. The image of a cordoned-off alley, flashing emergency lights, and stunned onlookers was instantly shared, retweeted, and dissected. The world watched, fascinated and horrified, as the story unfolded in real time. The victim, once a private figure connected to royalty only through history and shared experiences, had become a global headline. Kate Middleton and Prince William were notified shortly after the fall. The gravity of the news hit them in a way few could imagine. On one hand, there was the private sorrow, the shock of losing someone from their formative years, someone whose laughter, insights, and friendship had been part of their youth. On the other, there was the public dimension. Media scrutiny, social media speculation, and the delicate task of maintaining composure while grieving. The weight of dual realities pressed heavily upon them, a burden that few outside their world could fully comprehend. The bar itself became a crime scene, though not in the traditional sense. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly, security footage was reviewed, and emergency protocols were analyzed. Investigators sought to determine whether the fall was a simple accident, the result of negligence, or, as some speculated, something more sinister. Every angle, every detail, became critical in piecing together the puzzle. Was the railing secure? Had alcohol been a factor? Was there a misstep, or something deliberate? These questions would fuel both official investigations and public speculation for days to come. And then there was the immediate emotional aftermath. Friends collapsed in shock, some screaming for help, others clutching their heads in disbelief. The bar staff were frantic, trying to maintain order while simultaneously assisting first responders. The music, once a joyful backdrop, had become a grotesque counterpoint to the tragedy unfolding. People who had entered the rooftop for a night of celebration were now grappling with images that no human psyche is truly prepared to process. The psychological impact on witnesses cannot be overstated. Some reported feeling numb, as though the incident had occurred in slow motion. Others described a physical reaction, a sense of dizziness, nausea, and heart-pounding anxiety. One young woman, interviewed later, said that even weeks after the event, she woke in the middle of the night, hearing the scream replay in her mind, vivid and impossible to escape. Another stated that she still sees the shadow of the railing in her dreams, a haunting reminder of the moment when life changed irrevocably. What makes this rooftop fall particularly chilling is not just the height or the suddenness, but the human connections involved. This was a person with relationships, friendships, and a history that now intersected violently with the present. Kate and William's connection to the victim adds layers of complexity, emotional resonance, and public interest. The fall was not merely a statistic. It was a rupture in a network of relationships that touched the royals personally, yet exposed them to a global audience. As the investigation progressed, a series of unsettling details emerged. Witness accounts did not always align, with some claiming the victim had been cautious near the railing, while others insisted they were leaning recklessly. Security footage was partially inconclusive, leaving gaps in the timeline that authorities struggled to fill. These contradictions only heightened tension, providing fertile ground for speculation, rumor, and conspiracy theories. Could it have been an accident, or was there a hidden narrative waiting to be uncovered? Authorities confirmed that alcohol may have played a role, though they were careful to avoid premature conclusions. Toxicology reports would later provide more clarity, but the immediacy of public attention meant that speculation filled every gap. Social media was awash with theories, some sympathetic, some accusatory, some sensationalist. Every rumor added pressure, and every narrative pulled the story in a different direction. The fall, it seemed, was just the beginning of a larger, more tangled web. Kate and William, meanwhile, were navigating the dual reality of personal grief and public scrutiny. Their private reactions, shock, disbelief, sorrow, were hidden behind carefully measured statements, public appearances, and communications managed by palace officials. Yet, insiders report that the couple was deeply shaken, their composure tested by the combination of personal loss and global attention. The private mourning was intense, emotional, and far from the curated calm the public witnessed. Friends of the victims spoke of a life that was vibrant, full of promise, and tragically interrupted. They remembered shared moments from college, late-night conversations about ambition and dreams, and the unique charisma that had drawn them into so many social circles. These memories, now juxtaposed against the brutal reality of the fall, created a stark contrast that intensified grief and disbelief. The night's events would not end with the emergency response. The fall triggered an ongoing investigation, media scrutiny, and questions about safety, accountability, and the circumstances surrounding the incident. The rooftop bar, once a symbol of enjoyment and urban sophistication, had become a site of tragedy, speculation, and public fascination. And as authorities began to piece together timelines, witness statements, and security footage, it became clear that there was more to uncover, more than any single narrative could explain. But what makes this story even more gripping is what came next. A witness who claimed to see something unusual just moments before the fall. A detail so subtle, so easily overlooked, that no one thought to mention it at first. And yet, it might hold the key to understanding whether this was truly a tragic accident or something more complex. Something that would force the Cambridges and everyone involved to confront a shocking truth about that fateful night. No one could have anticipated the ramifications of that fall. The immediate horror was only the beginning. The ripple effects would touch friends, family, the royal household, and the public in ways that no one was ready for. And the deeper the investigation went, the more questions emerged, questions that could alter the narrative forever. News travels fast in the digital age, but nothing travels as fast or hits as hard as the notification of a sudden, shocking death. For Kate Middleton and Prince William, the alert arrived like a thunderclap, a single piece of information that would stop them in their tracks, demanding immediate attention. A former college classmate, someone from a shared past that had once felt distant and safely contained in memory, was dead. Not from illness, not from natural causes, but from a fall, a 100-foot plunge that seemed almost too terrible to be real. The initial reaction is something most of us can only imagine. Kate, known for her grace and calm composure, felt a gut-wrenching mix of disbelief and horror. William, equally composed in public, was struck by an overwhelming sense of helplessness. They were separated from the scene by miles and walls, yet the immediacy of the tragedy made them feel as though they were standing on the rooftop themselves, watching the horror unfold. The palace staff moved quickly to inform them, but no one could soften the blow, no protocol could mitigate the shock. In that first moment, emotions were raw and unfiltered. Kate reportedly clutched her hands to her chest, the sudden loss of someone once close bringing a sharp pang of grief that seemed to knock the wind from her. William's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing as he tried to process the news, his mind racing through memories, conversations, laughter, and moments shared with the classmate during their formative years. For a brief period, the world outside, the cameras, the public expectations, all of it faded. There was only the weight of grief, immediate and crushing. What makes grief like this especially complex is the duality of their lives. They are public figures, constantly scrutinized, always performing a role for the world, even as they navigate intensely private emotions. Here, the personal collided violently with the public. The royals were not only mourning a friend, but were acutely aware that the world would watch their every expression, every tear, every subtle gesture. The pressure to maintain composure added an extra layer of tension, as though their grief had to exist in parallel dimensions, raw and private on one hand, curated and controlled on the other. But within the palace walls, privacy offered little solace. A team of aides, security personnel, and advisors had already mobilized, preparing for public statements, handling press inquiries, and attempting to ensure that the narrative remained respectful yet controlled. Every message had to be considered, every action meticulously weighed. Yet the human reaction, the heartbeat, the trembling hands, the sudden tightening of the throat, could not be edited or filtered. Kate and William were navigating a minefield of emotional intensity while simultaneously preparing to respond to the outside world. Those closest to the couple later recounted scenes of quiet anguish. Kate reportedly retreated briefly to a private space, seeking a moment alone to gather herself. William, often stoic and measured, was said to pace, replaying memories in his mind, grappling with the disbelief that someone who had shared so many formative experiences was suddenly gone. Their reactions were intensely personal but also deeply human, a reminder that no amount of training, poise, or public expectation can shield anyone from shock. The immediacy of social media compounded the impact. By the time Kate and William received the news, Twitter, Instagram, and news outlets were already flooded with speculation, partial reports, and conjecture. Rumors of the fall, witness accounts, and videos of the aftermath circulated within minutes, turning a private tragedy into a public spectacle. For the royals, this added an additional emotional burden. Not only were they processing grief, but they had to do so under the unblinking eye of global attention. Every facial expression, every pause, every gesture would be analyzed, dissected, and interpreted by the world. In those first moments, memory becomes a torrent. Kate and William likely replayed images from their shared past with the classmate, studying together, walking across campus, conversations filled with laughter and camaraderie. They may have recalled moments of challenge and triumph, secrets whispered in late-night study sessions, dreams and ambitions exchanged in trust. Each memory now carried an added weight. The realization that none of those future moments, those opportunities for continued friendship and shared experience, would ever come to pass. The emotional toll extended beyond the immediate couple. Their families, advisors, and close friends were also swept into the vortex of grief. Calls were made, messages sent, and within the palace walls, a quiet but intense coordination unfolded, determining how to inform staff, how to manage public communications, and how to ensure that Kate and William were supported in their mourning. Yet even with a team of aides, grief is ultimately solitary. No amount of support can fully fill the void created by the sudden death of someone who was part of the fabric of your past. And yet, the couple had to make decisions. Should there be a public statement? Should the media be allowed immediate access? Or should the initial grief be contained privately? These decisions were complicated by the fact that the victim was known in elite circles beyond the university, with connections that might intersect with current royal engagements. The ramifications of each choice were immense, and each required careful consideration in a moment when rational thought is often overwhelmed by emotion. Insiders reported that Kate and William initially struggled to maintain composure, their usual restraint slipping under the weight of emotion. There were moments of silence, tears shed in private corners, and the occasional long gaze toward the window, as if hoping to see the past, to recover something irretrievably lost. The experience highlighted the tension between private sorrow and public expectation, a duality that has followed the royals throughout their lives, but is particularly acute in moments of sudden personal tragedy. As the world outside buzzed with speculation, Kate and William had to confront not only grief, but responsibility. A friend's life had ended under circumstances that were sudden, violent, and public. The family of the victim looked to them, and the public anticipated a response. They were thrust into a reality where emotional authenticity and public decorum were in constant conflict. How do you grieve privately while fulfilling the obligations of your role? How do you process shock when the world is watching, analyzing, and judging? The first hours were filled with a whirlwind of activity. Messages of condolence poured in from friends, colleagues, and other members of the royal family. Security personnel ensured the immediate privacy and safety of the couple. Advisors drafted statements, planned memorial gestures, and coordinated with the victim's family. Yet, amidst all of this, the emotional core remained singular. Kate and William had lost someone who had once been intimately connected to their past, a person whose life had intersected with theirs in ways that were deeply personal and profoundly human. One of the most difficult aspects was the speed at which events unfolded. In moments of shock, clarity is elusive, and the royals were confronted with a cascade of information, speculation, and rumor. Friends of the victim called, distraught and seeking guidance. Media inquiries demanded answers. Social media buzzed with incomplete narratives and wild conjecture. The couple had to navigate all of this while grappling with the raw reality. Someone they knew, someone they had shared formative experiences with, was gone. In the midst of this emotional turbulence, small details began to emerge, fragments of information that hinted at complexity and nuance. Some witnesses suggested that the victim had been cautious near the edge moments before the fall, while others claimed there was a brief moment of imbalance. Security footage, partial and grainy, provided clues but also contradictions. Questions surfaced that were impossible to ignore. Was it simply an accident? Could there have been an unseen factor? Was someone else involved? Each question added weight to an already overwhelming situation, and each contributed to the growing tension in the palace and beyond. Kate and William reportedly spent hours in private discussion, attempting to process their emotions while planning a path forward. Their grief was compounded by memories, by speculation, and by the unrelenting gaze of public attention. Friends later described them as withdrawn, pale, and almost haunted, navigating a storm of emotion that few could witness or understand. The private reality of their mourning was raw and intense, juxtaposed sharply against the polished image projected to the world. And yet, even in their private grief, they were acutely aware of the story's unfolding trajectory. Social media was relentless, journalists were persistent, and rumors were spreading like wildfire. Every detail, some confirmed, some conjecture, became part of the narrative. The couple had to prepare for public statements, while simultaneously dealing with the intensely personal loss of someone who had shared their past. The duality was overwhelming, the emotional strain palpable, and the uncertainty impossible to ignore. But perhaps the most striking element of their reaction was the way it foreshadowed what was to come. The immediacy of the tragedy, the depth of their grief, and the intense public scrutiny were only the beginning. Behind closed doors, Kate and William grappled with questions that had no easy answers. What had really happened that night? Could this have been prevented? Were there truths about the victim's past or their shared history that might shed light on the fall? And what would the investigation uncover in the days ahead? One private aide later described a moment when William turned to Kate, voice tight with emotion, and asked, "Do we really know what happened?" It was a question that echoed through the palace, through the media, and through the lives of everyone connected to the victim. Because in tragedies like these, the immediate loss is only one piece of a far larger puzzle, one that would challenge assumptions, reveal hidden connections, and force even the most composed individuals to confront uncomfortable truths. And as the couple prepared to make a public statement, one thing became painfully clear. The world was watching, the questions were mounting, and the story was far from over. The next revelation, the next twist, would test their composure, their memory, and their understanding of a past they thought they knew. Within minutes of the tragedy unfolding, the media descended like a storm, relentless, invasive, and impossible to ignore. In the digital age, news no longer trickles in. It erupts, an uncontrollable torrent that floods every screen, every social feed, every living room across the globe. The rooftop bar, once a place of laughter and celebration, had transformed into the epicenter of a media frenzy that would test the patience, composure, and privacy of everyone involved. The first reporters arrived on the scene before the paramedics had even finished their work. Cameras clicked, microphones were thrust forward, and journalists jostled for position, eager to capture the first eyewitness accounts. In one corner, a small cluster of friends huddled together, pale-faced and trembling, while flashing lights from cameras illuminated their panic. The scene was chaotic, yet calculated. Every media outlet knew the story's magnetic pull: royalty, tragedy, youthful glamour, and the shock factor all intertwined. Social media, of course, amplified the frenzy exponentially. Within minutes, hashtags were trending, tweets were going viral, and Instagram stories chronicled the scene with shaky, blurry footage. Some posts were sympathetic. Condolences poured in from around the world, strangers expressing grief for a life lost too soon. Others were sensationalist, speculating wildly about causes, motives, and hidden drama. Rumors spread faster than facts, each new post layering complexity and tension onto an already explosive situation. Journalists described a scene that combined urgency with spectacle. Drones hovered over the rooftops, attempting to capture aerial footage. News vans lined the streets below, sirens intermittently piercing the night air. The victim's family and friends were caught in the whirlwind, struggling to process grief while being hounded for statements, interviews, and reactions. It was the kind of pressure that few could survive unscathed, a relentless push from every direction, a spotlight that refused to dim. The bar's staff found themselves in the impossible position of managing both the tragedy and the media intrusion. One employee recounted hiding in the back office, listening to the frantic voices outside, and praying the cameras wouldn't catch a glimpse of the horror inside. Another described trying to redirect journalists while simultaneously assisting first responders and comforting terrified patrons. It was an extraordinary situation, one that would leave lasting emotional scars on everyone present. Even the city seemed to participate in the frenzy. London's streets, typically bustling and vibrant, became a theater of chaos. Pedestrians paused to watch the scene unfold. Taxi drivers craned their necks for a better view. Tourists, oblivious to the gravity, snapped photos while locals whispered anxiously. The energy of the city, normally alive with routine, now pulsed with tension and fear. News helicopters circled overhead, providing live footage for broadcast networks eager to cover the developing story. And then there was the international media. Within hours, the tragedy had crossed borders. News outlets from across Europe, the United States, and Asia were reporting the incident, analyzing it, and speculating on its implications. Headlines screamed urgency. Tragic fall at London rooftop bar. Royal connection shocks the world. Kate and William's college classmate dies in horrific accident. Each story, each report, carried a mixture of fact, conjecture, and dramatization, amplifying public curiosity and anxiety. Meanwhile, the public's response added another layer of complexity. Social media feeds were saturated with reactions, both emotional and speculative. Some posts expressed heartfelt sorrow, sharing personal reflections and tributes to the victim. Others focused on the royal connection, questioning how such an accident could occur and what it might reveal about the Cambridge couple's past. Rumors about alcohol, alleged disputes, or even more sinister possibilities spread like wildfire, creating an atmosphere of intense speculation. Within the palace, the media frenzy created logistical and emotional challenges. Kate and William's aides worked tirelessly to manage press inquiries, monitor social media, and prepare official statements. Every tweet, post, and headline was scrutinized. Every journalist's question was anticipated and strategized for. And yet, no amount of planning could fully contain the emotional impact of the tragedy. The couple was not only mourning a friend, they were navigating an unprecedented global spotlight that amplified every feeling, every expression, every hesitation. The speed of information created another complication: misinformation. In the digital age, rumors often outpace facts, and false reports can gain traction faster than corrections. Some online accounts claimed to have insider knowledge of the incident, while others suggested hidden rivalries or past conflicts between the victim and peers. Even well-meaning friends and classmates inadvertently contributed, sharing partial memories or private details that became public fodder. Each new post added pressure, fueled speculation, and increased the intensity of the media storm. Journalists and commentators also began digging into the victim's past, seeking details that could contextualize the fall. College photographs, yearbook entries, old social media profiles, and alumni stories were scoured for clues. Some reports highlighted their intelligence, charm, and wit. Others emphasize competition, tension, or perceived rivalries during college. The combination of personal history and royal connection created a narrative too compelling for news outlets to resist. Tragedy, glamour, and the unknown all intertwined in one story. The victims' friends were caught in an impossible position. Some wanted to speak, to share memories, to honor their friend. Others feared misrepresentation, intrusion, or even legal repercussions. One former classmate later admitted they felt like they were walking a tightrope, balancing grief with a very public stage they never asked to be on. It was a difficult, emotionally draining position, one that added layers of complexity to an already tragic situation. Kate and William were acutely aware of the media frenzy, understanding that every decision they made would be scrutinized, praised, or criticized. They had to navigate not only their private grief, but also public perception. Do they issue a statement immediately, risking emotional rawness? Do they wait, offering the family privacy, but potentially allowing speculation to run unchecked? Every choice carried consequences. Every action, observed or inferred, would become part of the story. And yet, despite the chaos, some elements of humanity persisted amidst the media storm. First responders quietly assisted the victims' friends. Journalists occasionally showed compassion in their interviews, and sympathetic strangers offered support. These small gestures stood in stark contrast to the overwhelming spectacle, reminders that even in moments of crisis, empathy and humanity can surface amidst the frenzy. But the relentless attention also revealed another truth. The more the public and media focused on the story, the more pressure it placed on the royals. Kate and William's connection to the victim meant that every headline, every broadcast, every social media post carried a weight beyond mere curiosity. It was personal, it was intimate, and it demanded attention, consideration, and response. As the night unfolded, rumors continued to proliferate. Some suggested that the fall was more than an accident. Others speculated about hidden struggles or conflicts. Every new rumor intensified the pressure on the couple, forcing them to consider both private grief and public perception simultaneously. Their aides reported that even simple gestures, like a walk in the palace gardens or a brief public appearance, were analyzed, dissected, and debated online. The media frenzy showed no signs of slowing down. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a journalist claimed to have obtained a witness statement that contradicted previous accounts. According to this report, something unusual had occurred moments before the fall, a detail overlooked in the initial chaos. Could it be accidental? Or was there more beneath the surface, a hidden factor that no one had considered? The claim sent shockwaves through the media, ensuring that speculation, rumors, and investigative reporting would continue to escalate. It became clear that the media frenzy was not just a consequence of the tragedy, but a force in its own right, shaping perception, influencing narrative, and amplifying tension. Every tweet, every headline, every speculative article was a thread in a rapidly expanding web, pulling Kate and William, the victims' friends, and the public into an increasingly complex and emotionally charged story. But just when it seemed the frenzy had reached its peak, a new revelation emerged. Surveillance footage from a nearby building had captured moments that no one had yet seen. Details that contradicted earlier reports, hinted at unseen interactions, and raised questions that no one was prepared to answer. And in that instant, it became clear that this story was far from over, that the media storm had only intensified, and the truth, with all its twists and consequences, was still waiting to be revealed. No one could predict what would come next. The headlines would continue to roll, rumors would escalate, and the investigation would reveal new, shocking details. But the most unsettling fact remained. The media frenzy, relentless and unyielding, had just begun to expose a series of truths that would ripple far beyond the rooftop bar, touching everyone connected to the tragedy in ways they could not yet comprehend. Years can have a way of burying secrets, locking them in the quiet corners of memory where they seem safe and distant. But sometimes, the past refuses to stay hidden. And in the wake of tragedy, it can resurface with a force that shocks even those who thought they had long since moved on. For Kate Middleton and Prince William, the death of their former college classmate was not just a brutal present-day event. It was a haunting reminder of shared histories, of friendships forged in lecture halls and dormitories, of rivalries and confessions long tucked away. College is a place of transformation, where the people we are collide with the people we aspire to be. And within those walls, the bonds we form can be as intense as they are fragile. The victim had shared countless moments with Kate and William during their formative years, moments that, until now, seemed distant and safely forgotten. From late-night study sessions fueled by coffee and ambition to spirited debates in sunlit classrooms, they had been inseparable in many ways, tied together by circumstance, intellect, and shared curiosity. But beneath the laughter and camaraderie were layers of tension, rivalry, and unspoken truths. College life, for the Cambridge trio, was not simply about learning from textbooks. It was about navigating a complex social hierarchy, balancing personal ambition with the pressure of expectation, and managing relationships that could shift from ally to competitor in a matter of weeks. The victim, it seems, had been at the center of this delicate balance, someone whose charm and intelligence earned admiration but also, perhaps unknowingly, stoked envy. Friends and classmates recall late-night conversations where ambitions were laid bare, fears were confided, and secrets exchanged. One former student, speaking anonymously, described the victim as someone who could make you laugh one moment and challenge every assumption you had the next. They were fiercely intelligent, analytical, and socially astute, a combination that sometimes created friction. Not everyone could keep pace with their wit or match their drive, and that tension occasionally led to subtle rivalries that lingered beneath the surface. Kate and William, for their part, were caught in a unique position. They were, of course, royal and public figures in training, but in college, they were just peers, navigating the same pressures, forging their own identities, and balancing the weight of expectation with personal desires. The victim had been both a friend and, at times, a challenger, someone who could provoke thought, spark debate, or challenge opinions in ways that few others dared. These interactions, seemingly innocuous at the time, now take on new significance as the tragedy resurfaces. Some classmates have spoken of moments when tensions escalated beyond normal disagreement. Rivalry over leadership in societies, debates over politics or ethics, and subtle social maneuvers created an undercurrent of unease that, in hindsight, hints at complexity beneath the surface. It wasn't malicious, at least not overtly, but these were dynamics that shaped relationships, fostered both admiration and resentment, and occasionally left lasting impressions. The victim was also known for their inquisitive nature. They asked questions that others avoided, probed for truths that some wished remained hidden, and maintained a curiosity that occasionally unsettled friends. Kate and William, who were navigating their own paths in this environment, occasionally found themselves caught in the orbit of these probing questions. Sometimes the questions were harmless, meant to spark conversation or laughter. Other times, they were pointed, exposing hidden assumptions, unspoken feelings, or past mistakes. In retrospect, these questions, these probing discussions, may have created subtle tensions or opened doors that the victim would later walk through unknowingly. What makes the resurfacing of college secrets particularly gripping is how they intersect with the present. In the wake of the rooftop tragedy, old friends, classmates, and even casual acquaintances began to recall moments that, until now, had seemed inconsequential. A playful disagreement in a cafeteria, a whispered argument over group projects, a hidden note passed in secret. All of these memories are now being re-examined under the harsh light of hindsight. People are searching for clues, connections, or motivations that might explain the circumstances surrounding the fall. And there are whispers of more troubling secrets. Several former classmates have hinted at private disputes or tensions that were never widely known, moments that were carefully hidden at the time but are now coming to light. One source claimed that the victim had confided fears or anxieties to a close friend weeks before the accident, though no one can confirm the nature of these concerns. Another hinted at disagreements with others in their social circle that, while minor at the time, may have left emotional scars or subtle resentments. These whispers, combined with the intense scrutiny brought on by the tragedy, create an atmosphere of suspense and unease. The public may not understand the depth of these dynamics, but for Kate and William, The past is personal. They remember who the victim was, not just the social media image, not just the academic achievements, but the person who walked beside them in dorm corridors, debated with them late at night, and shared moments of laughter and tension that now seem both poignant and haunting. The collision of past and present is almost unbearable. The tragedy of the rooftop fall is magnified by the memories it dredges up, the unresolved conversations it resurrects, and the questions about what could have been done, said, or prevented. Moreover, some secrets from college hint at pressures or circumstances that were invisible to outsiders at the time. The Cambridge environment, while prestigious, was intense. Expectations were high. Competition was fierce. The victim, like many of their peers, was navigating these pressures while maintaining a persona that projected confidence, intelligence, and control. Friends remember moments when that facade slipped, glimpses of vulnerability, anxiety, or self-doubt that were rarely visible but deeply human. These details, now emerging, paint a portrait of someone who was far more complex than anyone fully realized. What adds a layer of tension is the possibility that some secrets may have played a role, however indirectly, in the events leading to the rooftop fall. Was the victim's state of mind on that night influenced by unresolved tensions, by past rivalries, or by internal struggles that had persisted since college? Could minor conflicts or buried disagreements have contributed to a lapse in attention, a misstep, or a moment of vulnerability? These questions, while impossible to answer definitively at this stage, underscore the intricate web of connections, memories, and human behavior that makes this tragedy both compelling and unsettling. Insiders also note that the victim had maintained contact, however sporadically, with certain college peers. Some of these communications were